Hello and welcome. When I first met my next guest, I was in a marina. I saw his work and I was extremely impressed. He's a collector, a maker, historian, and above all, a really fine craftsman. In the next 3 episodes of The Collectors, we're going to learn about John L. Hacker, famous naval architect from the Great Lakes. But more importantly almost, we're also going to learn about the quirky people that actually ordered his product. Please welcome Greg Rice next on The Collectors. Greg, I'm really happy you came here to visit us on The Collectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And I really got to start this conversation off with, what was the spark that lit the fire that started you on this journey?
Well, when I was young, as most boys my age, one of my hobbies was building plastic models. I built ships and cars and planes, and nothing special, but I had a lot of fun doing it. Later in my mid-30s, I was looking for a way to unwind at the end of the day, and I remembered how much pleasure I got from that modeling experience, and so I thought maybe I'd give it a try. I wasn't sure what the subject matter would be, and I remembered back to a boat that my uncle and aunt owned and kept on Fenton Lake in Michigan. And when I was very young, I remember riding in that boat. And we actually have a photo of the boat here. That was the boat. It's a Century Runabout, and that's a picture of my grandfather sitting in the boat. And this next shot shows me at 18 months getting ready to take the family for a little spin. So as you know, riding in a wooden boat really makes an impression on almost all of your senses. And you know, that was a memory that I thought would be fun to try to recreate. So this is before the internet. I went down to the local library and I found this book, which had a number of blueprints of different designs from the 20s and 30s. I picked out one by a guy by the name of John Hacker. I took the plans home and I worked on it for probably 3 years, a lot of trial and error. And when I was all done, I put some electric motors in it and took it to the pond and ran it, and I've had a lot of fun with that boat over the years. It was a great experience.
Well, you continued after this to make John L. Hacker models, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is John L. Hacker here, pictures of him right here.
Yeah, while I was building this model, I did some research to try to find out who this guy was. And it turns out John Hacker was an amazing designer. He was one of the leading designers of this emerging high-speed hull form that took place as engines were more powerful and lighter weight. Boats transitioned from displacement hulls that moved through the water to planing hulls on top of the water.
Right.
And he was really a pioneer in that area.
I didn't know that, okay.
He designed a number of successful race boats, sweepstakes winners. We have a picture of one of his famous boats here, El Lagarto, that won 3 gold cups. Another boat, this is one of his last competitive designs, Miss Pepsi, won 3 President's Cups from 50 to 52. And if you visit the Dawson Museum on Belle Isle, you will see the boat. It's in its own freestanding building that's glass enclosed. So it's a pretty good piece of history. In addition to the racing, he was also a successful designer of production boats. In fact, he founded several companies, the most successful of which was Hackercraft.
Yep, I've heard of it,
and,
sure.
you know, when Chris Smith was building Chris Crafts for economy and value, John Hacker was marketing his runabouts, the Hackercraft, as the top of the line. They were high quality, unique designs, and ultimately a smooth ride. And in fact, they marketed them as the Steinway of runabouts.
Perfect, perfect.
So because of his reputation in the boating community for excellent designs. He had an eye for design and a really high quality. People who had the wealth and wanted to commission a unique vessel for their own personal use, they frequently went to John Hacker. And this gave him the opportunity to exercise his skills as a designer to the nth degree. And
because they had the money to pay for it.
They
right?
could pay, he didn't have to worry about the budget. And because of that, he developed and produced some of the most iconic and beautiful boats, to my way of thinking, that were ever produced. And now, nearly 100 years later, many of those boats are still in existence. So for me, it's the combination of, the local connection, the interesting history of the designer and the builders and the owners, and then the beauty of these boats. And the fact that they're still available, that's really the link that I'm looking for when I select a subject, because to me, these are really nautical works of art.
And, the reason they're still around is they were beautiful, they were expensive, they were unique, and that's why they were restored and they're still around, because they're that special, they're that iconic. So this is the first boat we're going to look at, Evangeline.
Yes, this is a 1/8 inch scale model of the 33-foot Runabout Evangeline. The boat was designed in 1924 by John Hacker, and it was built at the Hacker Craft plant in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And it was built for Hacker's friend, Henry Ford.
Oh boy.
The boat was powered by a 400 horsepower Liberty aircraft engine. And those engines were pretty special at the time. The Liberty engine was co-designed by Jesse Vincent of Packard at the request of the U.S. government to provide a high horsepower, lightweight, maintainable, and producible engine for use by the U.S. and the Allies in World War I.
As an airplane engine.
As an airplane engine. And the design work was done, and the prototyping and trials were all done at Packard. And then the U.S. government assigned production to a number of different manufacturers. They included Lincoln and Ford, Buick, Cadillac, and several others.
Okay.
So the production of that engine ramped up pretty quickly. They were running along smoothly, and then unexpectedly the war came to an end. And the U.S. government found themselves with a bit of a surplus. 20,000 engines had been produced, and only a couple thousand made their way into airplanes.
Oh.
So a number of these engines were offered as surplus sale to the public. And really, because they were high horsepower, lightweight, and very economical, it became a very popular engine for use in racing boats or other boats where high speed was desired. And a whole industry developed around marinizing these engines for use in boats. And in the case of Evangeline, she's powered by a Liberty engine that as you might expect, was produced at Ford, and it delivered about 49 miles per hour in Evangeline.
That's moving in 1924.
Absolutely. Now, if you look at this boat, your first thought wouldn't be that this comes from a 1924 era. The design has a lot more advanced features. One very noticeable element is the amount of flare in the bow. And that actually makes for a much drier ride, particularly at moderate speeds in a chop, and that was a request from Henry Ford. One of the design elements that you'll note is the tumble home in this boat, and that is where the sides rotate up over and toward the center line of the boat as it approaches the stern.
Right.
That design element became more and more popular in later years and was termed a barrel back or a barrel stern design. The seating in this boat is also unusual in that you'll note the bucket seats, and typically boats of this era all had bench seats. These seats were done up in blue, which was Henry Ford's favorite color.
Yeah, the Bluebird, yep. How did Henry Ford actually use the boat? Did he keep it on the river?
Right. So Henry and Clara Ford lived in Fairlane Manor in Dearborn, and their estate backed up to the Rouge River. The Rouge River, they had a boathouse located down there where they kept Evangeline. And from the Rouge River, they could access the Detroit River and ultimately Lake St. Clair. And on Lake St. Clair, they kept this large steam yacht. So it was a convenient way for them to travel to and from the yacht. In addition, in those early days, the Fords, particularly Edsel Ford, was very involved in powerboat racing. Now, Evangeline wasn't a race boat, although she did compete successfully in a few class races. But the Fords used the boat as a chase boat for their racing boats, and also she was used a number of times as an official's boat in some of these races that were held. We have a great photo here that was taken in 1924, and this shows one of the Ford's famous race boats, the 999, which again was designed by John Hacker, as were all of the Ford race boats. And it's running on the Rouge River in front of the Rouge factory. And in the foreground, off to the left, you can see the stern of Evangeline.
Oh, the boat right before us. All right, the model right before us.
And the next shot is an interesting photo that was taken in the 1926 Harmsworth race. That was an international competition. And in this competition, Garwood was defending with 3 of his Miss Americas against the French challenger Excelsior. And this was taken at the dock during a break in the action. And just beyond the competing boats, you'll see Evangeline.
That has to be.
So Evangeline was a committee boat in that race.
And that had to be a big party for that race right there. But what's the significance of the name Evangeline?
Okay, well, if we go back to that photo and we look at a blow-up of that photo, you'll see that in the front seat, the guy with the cap is Henry Ford. And right next to Henry, the lady is Evangeline Dollinger, for whom the boat was named. And then sitting on the deck is Ray Dollinger, her husband.
Well, she must have been pretty special to have a boat named after her.
Well, Ray and Evangeline were key employees at Ford Motor and also very close friends of Henry Ford. Ray was responsible for all of the non-automotive operations at Ford.
I'll be darned.
And Evangeline acted as a personal assistant for Henry Ford, and she also was Clara Ford's private secretary. But beyond that, Evangeline Dollinger was really the force behind the implementation of Henry Ford's idea for Greenfield Village. She's the person who went out and researched the properties. She located them, negotiated to have them moved, arranged a lot of the layouts. So she was really a big element for Greenfield Village. So they were key members of the organization, but beyond that, they were very close friends. And Henry Ford lavished some amazing gifts on the Dollingers, starting with an estate immediately adjacent to Fairlane Manor, which Henry had initially intended for Edsel. He gave them the estate complete with a mansion. Beyond that, Evangeline was also a successful harness racing driver. So Henry had a racetrack and stables complete with horses built on the Dollingers' property. In addition to that, Evangeline was the first licensed female pilot in the state of Michigan. So, of course, he gave her an airplane. He also gave them a vacation home on Lake Huron. So,
wow, this gal was quite the typist.
Well, he gave them a number of gifts. Now, 50 years later, Evangeline's son, John, would contend that he was, in fact, the son of Henry Ford. And he made his case in a book entitled The Secret Life of Henry Ford. Now, whether you believe his charge or not, the boat is an interesting read, and it gives some interesting insight to the private life of a very public figure.
Yeah. Now, the boat was then went somewhere else. What happened to the boat after Henry was done with it?
Well, actually, Henry then gave the boat to the Dollingers. Okay. They owned the boat, used it quite a bit over the next few years. In fact, we have a slide here showing them having a picnic lunch in what I assume was their boathouse.
Sure looks like it, yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, of course, the boat was sold. And as in the case with many of these boats, it passed through a number of hands and into obscurity. Then in 1986, this hulk of a boat shows up, And some enthusiasts have an idea that it might possibly be Evangeline, but they really can't document that. But a restoration has started, even though they didn't have a lot of information to work from. And it wasn't until 10 years later when a boat builder and nautical historian named Brian Robinson from California was able to actually confirm that this boat was Evangeline. He did it based on some archival photographs that he's collected, and primarily photos that show the stern geometry. Well, fast forward to 2015, and Brian Robinson and his father Tim are finishing up what has ultimately become a 25-year restoration of the boat. They bring her back to her former glory, and they take the boat to Lake Tahoe and enter in the Concours d'Elegance.
Okay, sure.
And she wins Best of Show. Now, it was about this time that I learned about Evangeline. I was finishing up another build, and I read several articles from Brian about the history of the boat and his quest for information and the restoration process, and I was just fascinated. So I contacted Brian, and fortunately for me, he'd seen some of my other work, and he was very enthusiastic about the idea of having a model built. And he and his dad were taking Evangeline to the Antique Classic Boat Society's annual international show up in Gull Lake, Minnesota. And so my wife and I jumped in the car, headed out there to meet him. Unfortunately, there were no drawings that show the actual structure of Evangeline. So my wife Cinda and I took measurements off of the hull as it sat on a trailer in the parking lot. From those measurements, I was able to draw lines for the boat. And then we photographed and measured all of the details on the deck and the cockpit and so forth. And with that information, coupled with a lot of correspondence back and forth with Brian Robinson over the next couple years of him taking photos and taking measurements and answering questions.
You're asking questions.
Yeah, we had a great time interpreting some of the history that had been uncovered. I was actually able to finish the model, and it looked as it does today.
And I guess you actually take it a step further. They're all radio controlled. Is that correct? And I think we have some footage.
That's true. My boats are radio controlled, and we have some footage here of Evangeline running on the water. I use modern electric motors. These are three-phase AC motors. They're brushless. They're very high efficiency. So there really isn't any need in this day and age to consider putting a gasoline engine in these. You can get the kind of performance out of an electric motor.
I noticed in this, Greg, the boat's attitude is correct for the scale. I mean, it looks the right pitch of the hull, the wake, everything is right on.
Yeah, my objective is not to hit a specific speed, but to try to create the appearance that you would have if you were observing from a distance the real boat running. And I'm pretty well able to replicate that. Water doesn't scale, so you don't get quite as much of the froth, but the attitude of the boat, as you mentioned, and the wake, I think very closely mirror the performance of the real boat.
Well, Greg, that's a beautiful boat for sure, and we've had a lot of fun talking about Henry Ford and his relationship with Evangeline. Now, the next boat is much different. It's another John L. Hacker boat. We'll take a look at that in a minute.
Yes, this is a different boat. A 1/12 scale model of the 55-foot commuter, Thunderbird. This is really a very famous boat. This boat has appeared on the cover of really every major boating publication and even on a U.S. stamp. So the boat was designed, again, by John Hacker in 1939, and it was built at Huskin Boat Works in Bay City, Michigan.
Yeah, right here in Michigan. Wow.
Absolutely. The boat was designed for a gentleman named George Whittell, and he was a character for sure. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He never worked a day in his life, and he was a rebel as a young kid. He ran away to join the circus. He married a Parisian showgirl.
Hey, I said these guys were quirky, so.
They were, and he certainly was. I could go on and on about George. But later on in life, when he inherited his resources from his parents, he spent some of that money purchasing about 50,000 acres of Nevada, which included almost the entire east shore of Lake Tahoe.
Wise decision.
So naturally, he went to John Hacker for the design of this boat.
So the boat was built in Michigan.
Yes, it was built up in Bay City. Sea trials were done on the Saginaw River. Then the boat was loaded onto a rail car and shipped across the country. And it was placed in Lake Tahoe, and it's been there ever since, with the exception of 2 summers spent in San Francisco Bay.
And the appearance on this boat is quite unique.
Yes, among other things, George Whittle owned a DC-2 airplane, which he called Thunderbird. And he wanted to replicate that whole airplane theme with the design of this boat. So that sort of explains this fuselage look to the cabin. In addition, there are 2 steering stations in the forward cockpit as well as the center cockpit, which was a docking station, again picking up on this airplane theme. And at the time, George Whittle also happened to be Duesenberg's single largest customer. He had about 7 Duesenbergs. And so that might have something to do with these big headlamps that you see on the top of the cabin.
Yep, common with a Duesenberg. And what's that? Is that an antenna on the hood, on the top there?
Yes, that's a directional radio antenna. I mentioned the different steering stations. So the boat had electric steering, and you would engage a Bendix clutch at whatever wheel you were at in order to steer from that wheel.
Okay.
So with the electric steering system, George Whittle installed a radio transmitting beacon on the mountain over his boathouse. He could be out in the lake in the middle of the night. It's pitch black out there. Maybe had a few too many to drink. He could turn on the radio with that antenna. He could pick up on that signal and link the radio signal into the electric steering system, and the boat could steer itself back to the boathouse.
And this is late 30s.
This is 1939. This is before we got into World War II, but it's the same technology used by fighter planes to find their way, back to an aircraft carrier or an island.
Now, I've seen current pictures of the boat, and it looks a little different today.
That's true. I wanted to model this boat as the way the boat was originally constructed. The boat was sold in 1962 to Bill Hara of Hara's Automotive Museum and Casino in Reno. Well, he wanted to use this boat for a completely different purpose. He wanted a party boat. So the first thing he did was he removed this aft cabin, which is basically over the engine room, and he opened up the whole aft section of the boat. He removed the 2 450-horse Kermath Marine engines that were powering the boat at the time, and he installed 2 1,500-horse Allison aircraft engines from a World War II P-38 fighter.
So now we're talking 3,000 horsepower.
And then he raised just enough clearance over those engines to have an open floor seating arrangement with a railing around the back. He also completely redesigned the interior consistent with his casino theme. And when he was all done, he called this his 70-mile-an-hour cocktail lounge.
Very appropriate. And I understand you actually visited this boat.
I did. As I was modeling this boat, I was having some difficulty with reference material that showed me exactly what this aft structure looked like. And I was doing an online blog, a build log, if you will, that showed in words and pictures what I was working on, and people could chime in with their thoughts. And through that process, I became acquainted with a gentleman named Earl Burton, who informed me that he was a volunteer docent at the Thunderbird Lodge Museum.
Oh.
And he explained that the lodge and the grounds and the boat were all under the care of a nonprofit organization, the Thunderbird Preservation Society. And they were also the caretakers of the George Whittell archives. And in those archives, they had several, maybe even 100 black and white photos showing the boat as it was originally constructed, its early days on Lake Tahoe, and they even had 2 16mm color home movies taken in like 1940.
Oh, that'd be fun to see.
They made all that information available to me, which dramatically improved the accuracy of my model. Of course, I had to redo a number of things. But through that process and my relationship with the folks at the museum, my wife and I were invited out to experience Thunderbird firsthand.
Wow, what a unique opportunity.
It was great. Here we have a picture. This was on a sunny morning in June in 2010, and we arrived at the boathouse. That's the custom boathouse where Thunderbird sits at her location. And they were getting ready to take the boat across the lake to be an exhibit at the Concours d'Elegance. They were selling raffle tickets for charity to win a chance for a ride on the boat. So we were loaded onto the boat and just having a little conversation when they fired up those engines in the boathouse, and it sounded like a bomb going off. I mean, we almost jumped out of our seats.
Yeah, it's gotta be.
So we have a photo of us backing out of the boathouse and then running across the lake. It was a gorgeous day. And of course, after we're out there a little while, they came back and said, Greg, would you like to drive for a little while?
Oh, wow.
And of course, I couldn't resist.
How could you contain yourself?
I couldn't resist. So I got to actually drive the boat across the lake.
Hey, I know that we actually have footage of this boat running on the water also.
We have a little footage.
It's not on Lake Tahoe, though.
No, this is a little footage. This is a little footage of the model. It's an old video. It's not the greatest, but you get the idea.
Again, it rides accurately.
Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, probably not completely scale for 65 miles per hour, but they don't run it that fast these days. They tone it down quite a bit.
Okay, yeah, there might even be a speed limit on Lake Tahoe. Greg, your boats are beautiful, there's no doubt about it, and we really thank you for visiting here, us on The Collectors. And as I said, it's a 3-part series. So our next show is going to be 2 other hacker designs, Lockpat and Pardon Me. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the next show. Thanks for watching.